folks, and welcome to the show. My name is Asa Morris, and this is Low Strangeness. It's been 2 weeks since the last episode, and if you kind of wish we were back on our weekly schedule, I apologize. But this bi-weekly situation is really beneficial to me as far as my constant teetering on burnout goes between, Low Strangeness and my day job. But I'm hoping to be able to give you all longer and more in-depth episodes than I was last season. So hopefully that evens out. But if you are loving this bi-weekly format, great. Me too. Before we get into it, let's do the business. Make sure you are following us on the socials, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. I think that's most of it. And of course, our YouTube, where every week I host a paranormal news rundown show called Weird Week, which, in my opinion, is excellent. Listen, if anyone wants to throw me like 50 or 60K a year, just fund that show, give me enough to live on, get some new gear, that'd be real nice, and I'll make you a real good show. Also, while I am totally not begging for money so I can do what I love for a living, our Patreon is up and running. We have all kinds of tiers and cool options, so if you like what we do and want to help us out, maybe help me get out of my day job so I can focus on this full time, that would also be wonderful. Thank you. My poor laptop is not doing well today. We've begun this recording about 9 times, so we're going to cross our fingers. Anyway, all of our links are available in the show notes or at linktree/lowstrangeness. That's the business. Let's go. I'm laughing at my laptop fan. You're probably going to hear it come on like 15 times. I should really back things up today while it still turns on. At least it'll give me 2 weeks to figure out the problem after this. Oh, that's not true. I have to edit Weird Week. Anyway. So, with the obvious hot topic of the summer being disclosure, supposedly dropping in some sure-to-be watered-down form only 4 days after this episode comes out for, the regular folks. Patrons are going to get it a couple days earlier. I wanted to get a little bit into previous leakers, investigators, researchers, and of course, hackers. You might know where I'm going with this, well, I guess especially if you read the episode title, who have made some statements or just waves in general in the past that previously sounded absolutely bananas, especially to the general public. But in the light of what we may be learning officially about in a couple of days, and in the way these things are being described a little cryptically by folks like Lou Elizondo, who has said things about humankind and that reality as we know it is much larger than we understand, well, maybe these previous leakers, researchers, whatever, weren't bananas after all. This is going to be a multiple-part series over the course of this season because whether or not these things that were dug up or about to be dug up are valid, the outcomes and the reactions are definitely worth revisiting. So today, we're going to start off this little mini-series with one of the more famous and recent ones, the British hacker Gary McKinnon, also known as Solo. McKinnon's ties to the UFO world, much like most researchers or people in general drawn to this life, stretch all the way back to his childhood. Around 1973, Gary, who was then 6 years old, watched his parents separate and divorce and eventually went to live with his mother and stepfather in London. Now, Gary's stepfather, who he apparently held in quite a high regard, previously had lived in the town of Bonnybridge, Scotland. Bonnybridge, which I didn't realize until researching this episode, is considered the UK UFO hotspot, apparently boasting over 300 sightings a year to this day. Balls of light, actual crafts of varying descriptions, everything. So as dads or stepdads do, Gary's stepfather told him tales of sightings and of the excitement and mystery in the skies over Bonnybridge. This fascinated the young Gary. Throughout his childhood, he dove into the subject, dreamed of worlds beyond our own, of civilizations and peoples and mysteries. But Gary was not someone who related especially well to his peers. He had difficulty making friends, maintaining close relationships, or just speaking the same language as the people around him. Metaphorically, of course. So when his parents noticed in 1980, they gave him his first computer, hoping that would open more doors for him and give him a common ground to exist on with other like-minded individuals. Well, Gary still maintained, you might say, a solo existence. He spent most of his time just writing programs, though at 15 he joined the British UFO Research Association, a small group of researchers who put out a periodical publication via a mailing list. So there were 3 points in Gary's life that, in my opinion, ultimately created his legacy: the stepfather, the computer, and finally, in 1983, Gary saw the film War Games. If you aren't familiar with War Games, it's essentially a film about teenage hackers who break into military networks and, well, everything just works out fine. Well, this may as well have been divine intervention because all of a sudden Gary knew what he had to do. Although it would still be some time before he was able to get there. Gary spent the next 20 years just living his life. He trained as a hairdresser, though that didn't work out. He became a network support manager, and that went well. He had girlfriends, didn't do so hot in school, and became exponentially more interested and borderline obsessed with the UFO phenomenon. Eventually, he read a book, The Disclosure Project, which was essentially 400 UFO reports from pretty credible witnesses, and also of stories from former military personnel regarding recovered technology, hidden technology, free energy, you name it. Scouring the internet and taking documentary after documentary in, he became convinced that the United States government was hiding information about UFOs, ETs, and technology that would allow for free energy, which he believed the people of the world had a right to possess, especially when, as he put it, retirees cannot pay to refuel their cars. And this seems to be right around where Gary actually chose to dive headfirst into his mission. Sources seem to differ on exactly when Gary began his quest, but sometime between 2000 and February of 2001, whenever visiting his girlfriend and, according to him, just smoking weed and having a few beers, Gary, under his chosen name Solo, would allegedly hack into 97 United States military and NASA computers over the next 13 months, downloading files and even antagonizing a little playfully. According to an interview in The Guardian, McKinnon said, "It was frightening because they had little or no security. I was always leaving messages on the desktop saying, 'Your security is really crap.'" Here's Gary in a 2019 interview with Richard Dolan explaining his process.
But what actually did you do? Like, you really didn't hack, as far as I could tell. You were looking for unguarded sites within the Pentagon. Isn't that so?
Yeah, not just the Pentagon, just a couple of networks. I think one was the Navy. Yeah, it was more like going fishing, really, because I knew they used Windows. Windows is just ubiquitous amongst the military, as it is over here as well these days. And I knew Windows was it's a very weak operating system. It's not what the military should use. Well, you can lock it down, to be fair. All the tools for locking it down are in there, but it's a laborious job. So all I did was I wrote a script in a scripting language called Perl, Program Extracting and Reporting Language. And this script just scanned every IP on a subnet. So it might have been 255 or 512 or however many. And tested the administrator password, which is the count on the local machine, which has full control of the local machine, to see if it was either blank or just password. I didn't even run like a big dictionary attack, just check for those two states.
I see.
Yeah, and so typically, say you scanned 50,000 machines, 5,000 of those might have blank passwords, and 500 of those, 5,000 of those might talk to you. So you could get what was called inter-process communication. And 500 of those will have blank passwords, so you could then log on and have a look on the network.
So you were looking for low-hanging fruit.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and that's what you found. So you entered the, I guess, is it the websites? Were they really called websites, or just the databases, I suppose?
They're just Windows computers and networks.
Right.
Sometimes you might find yourself on a logistics officer's machine, or it might be an administration officer's machine. You didn't really know until you were there.
So yeah, I'd agree. The security was crap. He basically just walked right in. Also, according to The Guardian, McKinnon also left messages saying U.S. foreign policy was akin to government-sponsored terrorism and that 9/11 was an inside job. Well, on March 19th, 2002, Gary got a knock at the door. And as you can probably imagine, this is where things start to get a little heavy. He was interviewed by police that day. His computer was immediately seized, and he admitted his guilt. In August, he was interviewed again by the UK National High-Tech Crime Unit, and in November of that year, the real trouble began. Gary was indicted by a federal grand jury in the Eastern District of Virginia. The indictment contained 7 counts of computer-related crime, each of which carried a potential 10-year jail sentence. The United States was now involved, and they were not happy. I'll be totally honest here, in that when it comes to court proceedings and this court and that court, it all becomes Greek to me. It's TV static, much like personal finance, apparently. So instead, I will let the Wikipedia article on this section do the talking for a bit. According to it, McKinnon remained at liberty without restriction for 3 years until June 2005, until after the UK enacted the Extradition Act 2003, which implemented the 2003 extradition treaty with the United States, wherein the United States did not need to provide contestable evidence. When Gary became the subject to bail conditions, including a requirement to sign in at his local police station every evening and to remain at his home address at night. If extradited to the U.S. and charged, McKinnon would have faced up to 70 years in jail. He had also expressed fears that he could be sent to Guantanamo Bay. Representing McKinnon in the House of Lords on 16th of June 2008, barristers told the law lords that the prosecutors had said McKinnon faced a possible 8 to 10 years in jail per count if he contested the charges, and again there were 7 counts, without any chance of repatriation. But only 37 to 46 months if he cooperated and went voluntarily to the United States. U.S.-style plea bargains are not a part of English jurisprudence, although it is standard practice to reduce the sentence by 1/3 for a defendant who pleads guilty. And McKinnon's lawyers contended that in effect this was intimidation to force McKinnon to waive his legal rights. McKinnon also stated that he had been told that he could serve part of his sentence in the UK if he cooperated. He rejected the offer because the Americans would not guarantee these concessions. McKinnon's barrister said that the law lords could deny extradition if there was an abuse of process. If the United States wished to use the process of English courts to secure the extradition of an alleged offender, then they must play by our rules. The House of Lords rejected this argument with the lead judgment of Lord Brown of Eton under Haywood, holding that the difference between the American system and our own is not perhaps so stark as McKinnon's argument suggests, and that extradition proceedings should accommodate legal and cultural differences between the legal systems of the many foreign-friendly states with whom the UK has entered into reciprocal extradition arrangements. McKinnon appealed to the European Court of Human Rights, which briefly imposed a bar on the extradition, but the request for an appeal was rejected. On January 23, 2009, McKinnon won permission from the High Court to apply for a judicial review against his extradition. On July 31, 2009, the High Court announced that McKinnon had lost his appeal. McKinnon's legal team, Solicitor Karen Todner and Barrister Ben Cooper, applied for a judicial review into the Home Secretary's rejection of medical evidence, which stated that when he could easily be tried in the UK, it was unnecessary, cruel, and inhumane to inflict the further stress of removing him from his homeland, his family, and his medical support network. Finally, on October 16, 2012, then Home Secretary Theresa May announced to the House of Commons that the extradition had been blocked, saying that Mr. McKinnon is accused of serious crimes, but there is also no doubt that he is seriously ill. He has Asperger's syndrome and suffers from depressive illness. Mr. McKinnon's extradition would give rise to such a high risk of him ending his life that a decision to extradite would be incompatible with Mr. McKinnon's human rights. She stated that the Director of Public Prosecutions would determine whether McKinnon should face trial before a British court. On December 14th, the DPP, Keir Starmer, announced that McKinnon would not be prosecuted in the United Kingdom because of the difficulties involved in bringing a case against him when the evidence was in the United States. Whew. Okay, that was a lot of legal stuff, and I apologize. It's very thick, very dense. The point is, Gary was in trouble, and there was a long, long battle between the UK and the US to decide what to do with him. Eventually, it worked out. Okay, so since then, what's been going on these last 9 years? Well, not much. Gary leads a normal life. He started his own tech firm. He's doing quite well for himself. He maintains a YouTube channel, which I will link to in the show notes, and occasionally does a rare interview with us paranormal nerds and researchers. It's turned out fine. Which, once I learned that, made me go, wait, what? The guy hacked into 97 American military and NASA computers, apparently downloaded info, was threatened with 70 years and potential imprisonment at Guantanamo Bay, and he's just living a normal life? That just seems weird. But wait, Asa, you're skipping over the best part. What did he find? Why isn't he in prison? Why are you talking about this on a paranormal podcast? Where is the cream in this Oreo? Well, we are going to take a quick break here, and when we come back, we'll get creamy. I promise, because it gets weird. Sit tight. Folks, welcome back. So, Gary McKinnon, a UFO enthusiast and hacker extraordinaire, cracks into military and NASA networks, downloads some things, and gets threatened with 70 years and potentially even that time at Guantanamo Bay. That's some serious shit. So whatever he found must have been some serious shit, right? Well, okay, so yes, but also maybe no. Here is a brief list of the things Gary has said that he found. First, that NASA had been altering photos to hide UFOs. This has long been speculated, and lately there has even been a movement on YouTube to attempt to de-scrub some photos, which goes as well as you would probably expect. Although there are some rare and shocking discoveries in a few of them, I'll link to one from the channel Mars Anomalies and Beyond, which is one of my favorite of these sorts of channels that I think is a great example of a successful de-scrubbed photo. But I digress. Gary has said that the photos were in two folders, essentially a scrubbed version and an unscrubbed version, which for some reason is hilarious to me. Again, talking to Richard Dolan, Gary said this regarding one of these photos.
And I couldn't download them, so I just double-clicked on one, just to see it there and then on the desktop. So I had to know instantly what was there. Could I confirm right there and then what Don Hare was saying? And I did, and then it started to come on the screen, and it was very slow, sort of shuttering down line by line. I thought, crikey, I can't bloody wait for this. I turned the screen down, and it's still quite slow. I thought it was a bit fast.
Maddening.
It ended up at, I think, 640 by 480 resolution.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then it was coming down. Okay, let's see. And there was what looked like fuzzy sort of grey at first, and then there was this lightning haze, and then there was the hemisphere of a planet. And then I'm like, this is it, found it, it's the Holy Grail, exactly what I was looking for, all confirmed, with one story, because that's what I wanted. I didn't want to read about it or watch videos of lights in the sky. I wanted, from the horse's mouth, so to speak, proof that A, they were real, and B, that NASA or the government knew about them. So here it was, and it got about 2/3 of the way down, and there was, I assume it was the Earth. I can't believe if it was a color or monochrome, but clouds, and then this perfectly smooth shell of a craft that got to just underneath its body, and there were no rivets, no seams. There was no sign of sort of working on this thing. It was weirdly smooth, but it did have these, like the golf ball domes, the geodesic domes for communications, like radar installations, which is kind of human, above and below. And
so these were on the craft, these domes type structures.
Yeah. So obviously
there's no possibility. I mean, I'm just having to ask this, that what you were seeing was an actual known satellite constructed by any nation? Is this something?
No, I've been into space as a child. So I was into just space in general. When I was little, I had airfix astronauts and stuff like that. I've seen a lot of satellites, well, a lot of satellite photos, and it was nothing like that, nothing like any other thing.
How else could you describe this? Did you ever get a complete image of it, or did it stop in the process of?
Yeah, I got caught about just over halfway down the screen. I actually saw the mouse move over because I could see the desktop live. I saw the mouse pointer hover over the LAN icon, the local area network icon, right click it and choose disconnect. That was me, gone. But I saw, more than half the picture.
So someone actually saw this happening and they disconnected.
Oh yeah.
I always try to visualize the craft he describes, and in my mind, it seems to be similar to the sometimes reported dumbbell-shaped craft, but with domes in the middle as well. I'm not sure. He does say in that interview that he drew it once for Linda Moulton Howe, but he never gave it to her. Also, Gary apparently found a spreadsheet listing non-terrestrial officers, ships, transfers between them, and even a few ship names. Among the ship names, Gary noticed USSS LeMay and USSS Hillenkotter in one of the folders. Interestingly, U.S. Navy ships usually only have 2 S's in their names, but Gary saw 3 S's in the Pentagon files and assumed the third S stood for space, which is probably a fair assumption. Also, according to Gary, I also found a list of officers in the Officers Who Do Not Work on Earth section, the non-terrestrial officers. This does not mean that this is a list of aliens, but it is the fact that they do not work on our planet. They served a fleet that did not consist of ships of the US Navy, but from spaceships far from our planet. He also said, I think what lies behind this is not on Earth. I found a list of names of transfers between technical units and a list of names of ships. And these were not the names of the US Navy ships. What I saw, it seems to me, were the names of spaceships. It is characteristic that these non-terrestrial officers were no longer featured in any other official documents. And this gives rise to a grandiose assumption. Secretly, from the whole world, the United States has formed an entire space fleet capable of moving at the speed of light. Using alien technologies, their ships have been flying beyond the solar system for a long time and are actively exploring deep space. Okay, obviously, that sounds like a huge leap, but this is not the first time that this suggestion has appeared among researchers or whistleblowers, which I'm sure we'll get into as we move through this season. And in relation to the current events unfolding in the United States, it lends quite a bit more credence to the idea that the Tic Tacs, at least, may be American black budget projects. But we're not going to dive into conspiracies today any more than we have to. From time to time, Gary has either said, or it has been reported that he said, that he managed to get a screenshot of the craft. I would assume one of those USSS ships. But in that 2019 interview with Richard Dolan, he clearly states that he did not get a screenshot before he was booted from their network, and that quote is most likely just misinformation. Side note, researching this story in general was pretty frustrating and interesting because almost every article I read contradicted every other article in some way. Again, I'm not getting into conspiracies more than I have to today, but I found that interesting. So anyway, if we are to believe Gary, he found documentation and photographs that clearly showed that the United States has and has had a secret space military program with ships, personnel, the whole nine. Which, if that's the case, that 70-year sentence, time on Guantanamo reaction, begins to make a little sense, right? I guess, but why not just kill him? I know that sounds harsh, but if there really was a huge, top-secret, black-budget space military back in, 2002, why would the United States let some self-proclaimed stoner walk around with that information to blab to anyone he saw? Well, the short answer there is, who the hell's going to believe him? Even now, in today's climate where the United States, the media, everyone is saying, listen up, there are things in the sky that we don't understand and they're not ours. Even now, people just refuse to believe it. Okay, so they let him live because he's a nobody with a crazy story. Continuing to argue with myself, why was he threatened with 70 years? The hacking, as he explained, it wasn't even really hacking. He just went in an open door and looked around. Well, the logical answer for that? 9/11 had literally just happened. Everyone was on edge, and especially the military. If the United States didn't perceive him as an actual threat, they absolutely had to keep up the appearance of the Iron Fist. They wanted to make an example of him. All right, but why the threat of Guantanamo? That seems super extreme. Well, this might have just been to scare him, honestly, or it could have been a weird technophobic knee-jerk reaction from the US. Even today, we see our government sort of being either unwilling or unable to keep up with the technological times. They might have perceived it as more serious than it actually was. The US claimed it spent $800,000 cleaning up Gary's mess, which I don't buy at all, because the two stories don't really add up. There's no way he could have done $800,000 worth of damage. He admitted to accidentally possibly deleting files, but if NASA's not backing up their files, that seems to be on them. Or it was just an empty threat. It doesn't really add up to me, unless he found something. At this point in the media, because of this, Gary was publicly well known. If he had, air quotes, committed suicide suddenly, despite the court saying he is depressed, well, people probably would have noticed, and that would not have looked good for the United States at all. So if Gary found something and they wanted to get rid of him, if Gary's telling the truth, Guantanamo would have been a great solution. And now Gary just goes to work, posts on his YouTube, lives his life, which I think is one of the only things that gives Gary real believability to me. He's not trying to sell books or do appearances, sign off on the movie rights. He just wants to go live his life. And maybe that's the smarter move if Gary found something. For the United States to drop it, ignore it, let it go. Maybe they shouldn't have even paid attention at all, except it was post 9/11 and everybody was super paranoid. So in the end, I'm not sure what to make of it. It's a ridiculous story and honestly could be like a Coen Brothers movie. Gary later would go on to explain that while hanging out on military computers, would have beers, smoke some weed, and maybe he had misinterpreted some of what he saw. He seems to flip-flop about being certain and uncertain. In a black and white world, that's a sure sign of a liar, but we don't live in a black and white world. I can barely remember 20 years ago. I can barely remember what the last episode of this podcast was about. On top of that, I certainly go through periods where I am more confident in both my memory and in my capabilities to be public, to speak, to answer questions, whereas other days I can barely get a word out. So without evidence, without some sort of official testimony, there's just nothing left to this story. I don't know if I believe it, and I don't know if it matters. Gary McKinnon gave us a wild ride and extraordinary imagery for us to ponder and to think about, and maybe he's right. Maybe someday we will learn that there's been a US military presence in space for decades, But at this point, again, without evidence, it seems irrelevant. I'm glad Gary's still alive. I'm glad he's doing well for himself. And I'm certainly glad that we have that story. And that's our show. Thank you so much for hanging out with us, for joining us whether again or for the first time. The music underneath the segments was provided by Iron Cthulhu Apocalypse, whose links will also be in the show notes. Make sure you're following us on all of the socials. Currently, I am most active on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And also make sure you are subbed to our YouTube for our weekly paranormal news show, Weird Week, where every Monday I give a quick rundown of a handful of the events that happened that week, caught my eye, as well as a handful of other series I have been working on. But that's that. My name is Asa Morris, and this, of course, is Low Strangeness. Thank you again for joining us. Take care of yourselves and the people around you. Be safe out there. I'll see you in 2 weeks.